You are watching the Co-op for Two YouTube channel. My name is Jesse Reichler. And today I'm going to demonstrate a new plugin I've written for OBS. OBS is the live streaming software that I use to broadcast and record board game playthroughs. And I've written a plugin that will auto zoom in on the top-down camera. You can see I've got a view of the top-down camera here. It's mirrored in both of these windows. That'll change in a moment. And during a playthrough of games, I frequently want to zoom in on an area of the table to show it on screen. And we're going to take a look at a plugin now that's designed to make that a little easier. Okay, let's get started. So in front of me, I have Micro Macro, a board game that we reviewed on the channel. And the hallmark of this game is this gigantic map. This table is 4 foot by 3 foot. So this is about a 4 foot by 3 foot, bigger than any board game board you would play with. But this will help demonstrate the features of this plugin. In this game, everything is tiny. It's sort of a Where's Waldo little hunt for clues. I'm not giving away anything by showing this map, and I won't do any spoilers. All right, so what are you looking at? You see me in the upper right. In the lower right window is going to stay this full top-down view of the entire table. It's pretty much the entire map is shown here, just a tiny bit cut off at the top and the bottom. And if you were playing this game, you'd get out your first cards for this case and put them here. Now, I don't mean to say that this plugin could really let you play this game live on YouTube. This is one of the few games that I do not see how you could play just because there's too much to look for. But I will just demonstrate the features of this plugin. So I've got these two little markers, and I'm going to just put them on the table. And you see what happens. It recognized the position of the markers and zoomed in to that location on the table. So let's just take a look at what's happened here. On the left of your screen, you're going to see the side view on the left is always going to show what I would normally be broadcasting if I was playing. So actually, let me show you. If I was playing this, here's the view I would be using. Me on one side of the screen and whatever I'm zooming in on the other. You can see I could expand these out a little bit. Okay, so that's the basic idea of what this plugin does. It just automatically zooms in a particular view to wherever these green markers are. Now let's go back to the demonstration view because it's a little easier to see what's happening. Okay, if I cover up the markers, you'll see it'll cut back out to the full view, and if I show them again, here they are here. Okay, now there are a couple of things to there are a lot of little details to go into. I'm just going to demonstrate some of them. You'll notice that the actual view of this camera is a wide view, and I'm projecting it here into this narrow monitor here. I'm just going to make this go up a little and try to fit it. Okay, so it knows the aspect ratio there and everything. So if I crop to an area that won't fill up the screen, it just goes in as much as it can and crops out the rest. Now that's assuming that when I want to draw attention to an area, I don't want to show anything outside of these green markers. For a game like this, that's probably not a concern. I don't care if the person sees additional information, so I could turn off the cropping. Now it's going to do its zooming in exactly with my markers, but it's going to fill up the space around where my markers are. The only thing when it can't is when the camera doesn't extend that far. So if you pick a very narrow strip, that's, you can see it's gone to the left and right of the markers. And same thing here. There's extra space. Okay, now sometimes if we're playing a game, like let me just get out another game. I'm just going to take these markers, put them off to the side. If they're close together, it knows to ignore them. We'll talk a little bit about some of the algorithm in there for eliminating stuff. Okay, let's say I wanted to read this to the player and let them see it. I could come down and say, okay, show this whole page. I might have to move it a little in view. Okay, show this whole page, all right, while I read it. And then there are cases in these kinds of games where I definitely do not want you to see what's outside of a paragraph, because that's information that's not relevant. This happens a lot on if we play like a Sherlock Holmes game where there's a certain paragraph and I only want you to see that paragraph, then the cropping feature is important. So only what I have indicated will be shown, and if there's stuff outside that area, it won't be shown. I guess it's not so useful here, but you can see here. Here's an example of where it's important that I not show what's above and below. Now, you'll notice that some regions of the view are quite pixelated when it zooms in. This is all digital zooming here. And I'm going to go off this view of this book to show you a little bit more. All right, so let's say I zoom in on this little quadrant over here. Okay, so there it is, and that's the kind of detail. And if I pick a smaller region, you'll see it'll get a little blurry. Okay, so that where you can see on the lower right of your screen, this is where I'm zoomed in. Now I've actually got two cameras above me. One is this wide view of the table, and one is a camera you can't see, which basically just covers this region here. So what you'll see is if I zoom in on this region, it's in much more detail. So the plugin is actually, in addition to doing this little machine vision analysis of where the markers are and zooming in, it's also switching between two cameras so that it can use the detailed close-up camera when you're in a specific region covered by that camera, and we'll switch to the overhead zoomed out camera when not. Now I've got the camera way zoomed out on this view. That's why it's so blurry when I need to go way over here. But normally you wouldn't need such a large region. Now, if you want to see, it's kind of interesting to see when it switches view. So I'm gonna kind of push these up until you see it transition to the other camera when one of these markers gets out of the view of the other camera. I think there it goes, you can see. So it actually uses a fade effect when it's switching to a wider camera and clicks in when it's switching to a narrow. So now I'm going to go down until we get to the closer camera view, and you'll see it'll just click in at some point. So there you go, now we're in the close-up camera view with more detail. Normally you wouldn't be zooming in so much. And but you can, with this top-down camera, you can get quite good. Okay, so what else can you do with this plugin? We can do a couple things. If we look at the debug mode, we can see, you probably have a hard time seeing the actual underlying image underneath, but this actually is showing you on the left-hand side of the screen now. This is a debug mode that you can use to get your settings correctly. The left is the wide view camera. The right is that I'm currently on is the close-up camera. So you can see the white box around the right-hand debug view is showing that we're on the close-up camera. And as I move it, you can see those green boxes are where it's detected the markers are. If I cover up one, it just assumes that one is occluded and doesn't change anything. If you cover up both, it's going to now switch over to the wide view. You can't see it because we're in this debug mode. But you'll see actually, so here we are in the close-up mode. Now, as I leave the region covered by this camera, you'll see it switch over to the other monitor. There we go. Now we would be on the wide monitor. And the yellow is showing where it's currently tracking, and the white would be what it's currently viewing. So you'll recall from here that there's actually a delay between when you move it and when it transitions, and you see it pans over to the new location. That's just to keep it from jittering around too much, and if you knock it while you're moving it, it doesn't move constantly. There's a little bit of delay and a little bit of movement, and it tries to pan and zoom around. So if we go up here, you'll see it'll pan over to there, and then to the left it'll pan over. So it pans when it can, and then it switches over to the close-up camera when it can. All right. Now, if there are no markers seen, or if the markers are together somewhere, it switches to its default view. And I have this set now to do the entire wide view. But this is not always what you want. In fact, if I normally broadcast and have a side view, for example, like this, I don't want the default view to be a view of the entire table. I actually want my default view to be my close-up camera, sometimes zoomed in, sometimes not. So just to show you what that looks like here, I've got some hotkeys configured. You can configure this all in the options, and then you've got hotkeys. So I've got hotkeys to change what I show by default when there are no markers. So let's just go through that. So here's the wide view of everything. Here is the the close-up camera showing the entire close-up camera. So you can see its range is quite narrow. That's the entire close-up camera. And then I've got a it's a zoomed in view of the top camera that is designed to fill up this entire space, however much space you've allocated on the screen. So this would be a reasonable default view for me. So let's just take a look at what I mean by that. So if there's no markers on the screen, it shows it at this level of zoom. This would be useful if I was like reading and stuff like that. And so I could just leave it on this view most of the time. Then if I wanted to zoom in on a specific area, I could do that. Oops, let's keep it in the close-up camera's range. Okay, so no markers, and it goes to its default. Same as here. So you could just, if most of the time you need to use markers, you would just set it, configure it to be your default zoom in view, but know that if you needed to zoom in closer, you could, but also if you needed to zoom in further away, you could. So being able to control the default view is very useful. What else should I show you? I guess that's the main thing. The other thing that, one other option that might be useful is that you can see it's adjusting as I move these markers around. If you were dealing with something with lots of green in it, lots of color, you can turn off with a little button the auto updating. So now it doesn't matter where my markers are or what else is on the screen, nothing is going to change. But then I could use a hotkey to just do a single adjustment when I want. So if you were having trouble, you had something with lots of colors, you could just configure it so that it never automatically switched, just switched when you told it to. So we'll hit the button, and there it will zoom in to the shot. And that way, if you don't want to have to deal with the markers on the screen most of the time, just occasionally to configure your view, maybe you want to tweak the size of the board to exactly capture the board on the table, then you could just do it and then leave it alone for the rest of your stream. And I think that's basically about it. I could show you the some of the options. Oh, let me show you a couple of things. I'm going to turn back on the automatic updating. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to show you is, you notice that, like, let's say I wanted to zoom in on this person up on the roof here. I showed you before that by default here it's cropping out stuff outside the markers. Games like this, you wouldn't care about hiding stuff outside the markers, so you would just turn off that cropping part. And that way it always fills up that entire view. There's another option though. I'm going to turn back on the cropping. There's another option that has to do with when you put these markers in line. So if I put them horizontally in line, what I'm saying is fill the screen this way horizontally and then go down as much as will fit and fill up the screen completely. That actually can be useful if you're reading, for example, and you want to show this column. I could put these markers here at the top of this column. So I've said fill the horizontal with this space and then go down as much as you can. And then as I read, I might shift down a bit more, then shift down a bit more, and so on. Now we're at the end of the top-down camera, unfortunately. So anyway, you get the idea. If we get off the top-down camera, perhaps it's easier to see. So as I go down, it's just going to put this at the top and go down as I go down. Okay, so there's that. And in the same way, if what you care about is height and not width, you could line them up this way. Now you're just saying fill the height of the screen with these markers and go as far over as you can. You wouldn't use it for this kind of view because you do care about going all the way, but there may be times when, I suppose, if it's a line like this and you said, okay, fill the screen, fill the screen as long as the height of this thing matches. So you're saying I want this entire height in, but go over as much as you can to fill the screen. Whereas if you did it manually, you'd get some cropping. So putting it in line says, just go over as much to fill the screen. All right, I think that's all to show you for actual functionality of the plugin. I could show you if you want to see some of the options. Let's see if I can bring this up. So here's the options for this plugin. There's a lot of them. Just going through them very quickly, we've got some things to turn on the debug mode, a little chroma debug feature that helps you identify and configure the markers to make sure they're detected properly. It basically uses the same settings as an OBS chroma detection, so you can basically say the color of the markers. Traditionally for green screen removal, you would use green, but you can use magenta or whatever. Then you've got a couple options to control the how close to the color that you've configured. So you'd want to configure that and get it right. We've got our sources here, the number of cameras. Normally, if you only have one top-down camera, you just configure your one camera here, but you can configure multiple cameras as I have here. One of my cameras, by the way, is is a 4K camera. Now, normally when you broadcast on YouTube using OBS, you're broadcasting at 1920 by 1080, whereas 4K cameras 3840 by 2160, so better resolution. So if you actually have a good quality 4K camera and a good quality 4K capture device, the digital zoom actually won't be losing any information, at least up to 2 magnification. So that's actually a good way to use a 4K camera for OBS. Okay, and then there's lots of options for, kind of hard for me to see, for it's telling it what kind of zooms the cameras are in so that it gets marker sizes correctly. Whole bunch of settings for detecting markers properly and ruling out false positives. I guess we can probably see a good example of that here. There's a little bit of green on this. Let's see if I can show you better. Let's turn off the chroma. Okay, so, and in fact, I need to turn off these markers. Okay, so you can see on the box, there's this. See if I can get a better view here for you. Okay, so you can see on the box, there's this little green spot. And if we go in and take a look at what it's finding and what it's getting confused about, those are the 2 markers. You can see it's found them. And then it's finding all other regions that are triggered by this green screen thing. So it's actually found this green area. But you can see the boxes in red. That's because it knows it's too big. So there's all kinds of settings you can set for telling it how to recognize what markers you're using, the size and color and shape, to rule out other false positives, so that if you do have some green on your, if you do have some colors on your table, let's just try to get all this off here. So that if you do have some colors on your table, trying to get this to go to a wider view. Okay. So if you do have some other colors on the table, they don't get distracted by it. Okay, and so there are a couple modes of looking at the screen to help you better tune those settings. And then we've got settings for whether to zoom and crop in. The output size of the plugin is configurable. That's important. That's what you see me doing here. Yes, that's what you see me doing here. How the output of my thing is actually only using half the screen. If you wanted it to use the full screen, you would do it something like this. And then we'd have to turn on. Right, okay, so anyway, the point is that you can configure the precise output, how much space you want it to take up on the screen. And I can almost not see this stuff. You can control alignment when it's cropped out, a whole bunch of different stuff. I can't even read these, you'll just have to look at them. I will be open sourcing this at some point once I tune it a little bit better. And then you've got a whole bunch of settings for what to do when there are no markers detected, how this is what controls whether the default is there or there or there or there, etc. That's what you're seeing down here. That's the markerless settings. Yeah, so there you have it. That's my AutoZoom plugin for OBS. It took about 3 weeks of work and some very unfun debugging. But I'm still not 100% sure how useful it will be in practice. It may be more trouble than it's worth for most videos, but occasionally you may have a live stream where being able to zoom in is useful, whether it's a board game or perhaps if you're anything where you're doing top-down stuff and you want to focus on details. If it's of interest to you, stay tuned. It will be open sourced soon.